Hey guys, tonight we're going to sink into the truly awful tragedy of the Hohenstaufen family. Now, when you hear tragedy, your mind probably jumps to Shakespearean plays, maybe a classic Greek myth, or perhaps even a particularly dramatic episode of a reality TV show. But trust me, the Hohenstaufens put all of those to shame. Their story is one of soaring ambition, incredible power, and then a fall so catastrophic, so utterly complete, that it leaves you wondering if some ancient curse truly hung over their dynasty. Imagine, if you will, that you are a minor noble in the dusty, fractured lands of the Holy Roman Empire during the 12th century. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and the faint tang of horses. Your days are spent managing your small estate, perhaps dabbling in local disputes, and always, looking over your shoulder. For generations, the empire has been a patchwork of powerful dukes, bishops, and counts, all vying for influence, all theoretically subservient to an emperor who often has less real power than a particularly stubborn goose. You've heard whispers of a new, rising family, the Hohenstaufens, from Swabia. They're seen as ambitious, capable, and increasingly, a force to be reckoned with. You might dismiss them as just another fleeting power player, another name to remember for a few years before they fade into obscurity. But then, the whispers grow louder. Their castles seem to grow taller. Their banners fly higher. And one day, you realize, your world, the one you've always known, is about to be reshaped by their relentless drive. This isn't just history. It's a deep dive into a lineage so cursed by fate, so relentlessly pursued by their enemies, that you'd probably last about 5 minutes before either getting caught in a siege, accidentally offending a cardinal, or simply dying of a mysterious fever that swept through half the continent. Seriously, medieval survival rates. Not great, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to think about people drifting off to sleep with my voice. All across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported back to the nascent stages of the Holy Roman Empire, a sprawling, often chaotic entity that stretched across much of Central Europe and into Italy. It's a complicated beast, this empire, a successor to Charlemagne's vast dominion, but perpetually entangled in a power struggle between the emperor, who claimed secular authority, and the Pope in Rome, who asserted spiritual supremacy over all of Christendom. You see this fundamental tension constantly simmering, often boiling over into open conflict. It's like watching two immensely powerful siblings, each convinced they know best, constantly wrestling over the same toy. In this case, the very soul of Europe, in the midst of this intricate political landscape, around the late 11th and early 12th centuries. You start to notice a particular family, the Hohenstaufens, emerging from the Duchy of Swabia in what is now southwestern Germany. They aren't initially emperors, just powerful and ambitious dukes, shrewdly navigating the complex web of feudal loyalties. You witness their strategic marriages, their careful accumulation of land and castles, their quiet but relentless climb up the ladder of medieval power. They are known for their military prowess, their organizational skills, and perhaps most importantly, their unyielding will. You might spot a young Hohenstaufen knight, armored and stern-faced, leading his contingent of soldiers with an almost intimidating precision. A stark contrast to some of the more haphazard feudal levies you might have encountered. Their true ascent begins with Frederick I, known as Frederick Barbarossa, meaning Redbeard, who becomes Duke of Swabia in 1147. You see him as a towering figure, both literally and figuratively, He possesses a charismatic presence, a keen intellect, and an almost superhuman energy. He is a man of action, a warrior, but also a skilled politician. You watch as he meticulously builds a reputation for fairness and strength, when the previous Salian dynasty, which had held the imperial throne, dies out. The princes of the empire are faced with a choice. Barbarossa, through a combination of strategic alliances, promises, and his undeniable force of personality, secures his election as King of Germany in 1152. This is the first crucial step, but being King of Germany isn't enough for Barbarossa. He has a grander vision. He dreams of restoring the glory of the ancient Roman Empire, of a unified, powerful Holy Roman Empire stretching across Europe, with the emperor as its undisputed head, wielding both secular and, perhaps implicitly, even spiritual authority. You observe his relentless efforts to achieve this vision. He makes numerous expeditions into Italy, the heartland of the old Roman Empire and, crucially, the seat of the papacy. These Italian campaigns are arduous, costly, and often brutal. You see his armies marching through the Alps, enduring harsh conditions, and laying siege to rebellious Italian cities. His relationship with the papacy is particularly volatile. You witness the constant tension between Barbarossa, who views himself as God's chosen representative on earth for secular matters, and the popes, who believe they hold ultimate spiritual, and thus often temporal, authority over all Christian rulers. It's a fundamental clash of ideologies, a power struggle that defines the entire Hohenstaufen era. You might see him negotiating fiercely with a pope, their faces grim, neither willing to fully concede to the other. There's a famous anecdote where Pope Adrian IV supposedly insinuated that Barbarossa held his crown as a beneficium, a feudal grant from the pope, to which Barbarossa erupted in fury, seeing it as an insult to his imperial dignity. This constant friction, this fundamental disagreement over who was truly in charge of Christendom, would plague the Hohenstaufens for generations. It's a commonly known historical truth that the investiture controversy was still very much alive in this period. Barbarossa spends much of his reign trying to assert imperial authority over the fiercely independent Italian city-states, particularly the wealthy and powerful Lombard League. You see him besieging cities like Milan, often brutally sacking them when they resist. These campaigns are met with fierce resistance, and despite his military genius, the Italian cities often prove to be a tenacious foe. The prolonged wars in Italy drain his resources and manpower, diverting his attention and strength from consolidating power in Germany. You feel the weariness of his soldiers, constantly campaigning far from home. Yet, despite the endless conflicts, Barbarossa maintains a strong grip on Germany. You observe his skillful management of the German princes, balancing their ambitions, rewarding loyalty and suppressing dissent. He revitalizes the concept of imperial law and justice, attempting to create a more orderly and centralized administration, a unique detail for a medieval monarch operating in such a decentralized system. He holds grand imperial diets, assemblies of princes, showcasing his power and fostering a sense of imperial unity. You might see him presiding over one of these magnificent gatherings, radiating authority, a truly impressive figure of medieval kingship. Barbarossa's story takes an interesting turn with the Third Crusade. You witness him, despite his advanced age, taking the cross and leading a massive German contingent to the Holy Land in 1189. This decision, seemingly out of character for a man so focused on European dominance, shows his deep piety and the immense prestige associated with crusading. However, his journey is tragically cut short. You hear the shocking news he drowns in a small river in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey, in 1190, a surprisingly mundane end for such a colossal figure. The exact circumstances of his death are still debated by historians. Was it a heart attack, an accident, or did the cold water simply overcome him? It's one of those tantalizing historical unknowns. His death is a devastating blow to the empire and a tragic beginning for his family's long and arduous decline. You sense the immediate vacuum left by his immense presence, his grand vision, though never fully realized, had laid the groundwork for a powerful Hohenstaufen legacy, but it had also set them on a collision course with forces that would eventually consume them. The papacy, always wary of imperial overreach, would see his demise as an opportunity, a subtle shift in the balance of power that would soon unleash unprecedented conflict. The stage is now set for his ambitious and ultimately ill-fated descendants. You now find yourself standing at the dawn of a new, darker chapter for the Hohenstaufen dynasty. As the formidable shadow of Henry VI, son of the legendary Frederick Barbarossa, falls across the Holy Roman Empire, he inherits a vast but deeply troubled realm, and his reign, though marked by incredible ambition and ruthless efficiency, will ultimately prove to be a precursor to the terrible misfortunes that would later engulf his family. Imagine the immense pressure on Henry, following in the colossal footsteps of his father. Barbarossa had been a larger-than-life figure, a crusader, a warrior, a statesman who had commanded immense respect, even from his enemies. Henry, however, possesses a different kind of brilliance, a cold, calculating intellect, an unyielding will, and a ruthless pragmatism that often bordered on cruelty. You observe him, a man of slight build but immense presence, his eyes sharp and unblinking, constantly assessing, constantly planning. He is a master strategist, both on the battlefield and in the convoluted game of medieval politics. Henry's immediate objective is to secure his imperial title and solidify his family's grip on Italy. You witness his determined march south, following his father's footsteps. But with an even greater sense of urgency, the prize is the wealthy, strategically vital Kingdom of Sicily, which includes southern Italy and the island itself. This is a crucial detail, as it was a Norman kingdom, fiercely independent, and its acquisition would fundamentally alter the balance of power in Europe. Giving the Holy Roman Emperors direct control over a rich, well-organized territory with a powerful navy, the path to Sicily, however, is fraught with peril. Henry's marriage to Constance of Sicily, the rightful heiress to the Norman kingdom, is his strongest claim. You see the sheer luck involved in this union. A brilliant diplomatic coup orchestrated by Barbarossa, but when Constance's nephew, Tancred of Lecce, seizes the Sicilian throne, Henry embarks on a series of brutal campaigns to reclaim his wife's inheritance. You witness the sieges, the battles, the methodical grinding down of resistance. Henry is not known for his mercy. Cities that resist are often subjected to terrible sackings, their populations suffering immensely. This ruthless ambition in conquering Sicily is a commonly known historical fact, laying the groundwork for a deeply entangled future for the Hohenstaufens. His conquest of Sicily in 1194 is a moment of immense triumph. You observe him crowned King of Sicily in Palermo, completing his unprecedented territorial expansion. The Holy Roman Empire now stretches from the Baltic Sea to the heart of the Mediterranean, encompassing Germany, northern and central Italy, and the wealthy Kingdom of Sicily. This vast empire, unprecedented in its scope, seems to fulfill Barbarossa's grand vision. You might see the proud banners of the Hohenstaufens flying over 2 continents, a symbol of their immense power. This expansion, however, also brings a monumental challenge: how to govern such a diverse and geographically dispersed realm, constantly battling the inherent regionalism of German princes and the fierce independence of Italian city-states. But even with this triumph, the relentless papal imperial struggle continues to cast a long shadow. You remember the foundational conflict between temporal and spiritual power that plagued Barbarossa, with Sicily now under imperial control. The Pope feels increasingly encircled, threatened by the immense power of the Hohenstaufen Emperor. Rome is, after all, nestled right between Imperial Germany and Imperial Sicily. You sense the palpable fear in the Vatican, the growing animosity between the Emperor and the Pope, a key detail that will prove fatal for the dynasty. Every move Henry makes to consolidate his power is viewed with suspicion by the papacy. Seeing it as an attempt to subjugate the Church, Henry, in his relentless pursuit of absolute power, even attempts to make the imperial crown hereditary for the Hohenstaufens. This is a truly radical move in a system where emperors were traditionally elected by the German princes. You witness his negotiations, his promises, his threats, trying to convince the powerful German magnates to accept a hereditary succession, while he ultimately fails to secure this outright. He manages to get his infant son, Frederick, elected king of the Romans, effectively designating him as the next emperor. This seemingly secures the future of the dynasty, a moment of profound success. However, Henry's reign is shockingly brief and tragically cut short. You hear the terrible news he dies suddenly in Messina, Sicily, in 1197 at the incredibly young age of 32, likely from malaria or dysentery. This premature death is an awful tragedy in itself, as it plunges the empire into immediate crisis. His grand plans, his vast empire, are left in the hands of his 3-year-old son. Frederick II. The timing of Henry's death is particularly disastrous. You witness the immediate unraveling of his carefully constructed power. The unity of the empire, so painstakingly built, immediately fractures powerful German princes who had begrudgingly accepted Henry's authority. Now see an opportunity to reassert their independence. The papacy, relieved and opportunistic, immediately seizes on the chance to undermine Hohenstaufen power, fearing the implications of a united Germany and Sicily under one ruler. This rapid disintegration upon Henry's death highlights the precarious nature of medieval power. Dependent so heavily on the strength and presence of the individual ruler, the political landscape immediately descends into chaos. You see the German throne contested by rival factions, leading to a long and destructive civil war between Philip of Swabia, Henry's brother, and Otto Fort of Brunswick from the Welf family. Long-standing rivals of the Hohenstaufens, this German civil war further weakens the central imperial authority and drains the resources of the empire. Meanwhile, the young Frederick II, still a toddler, is essentially orphaned, placed under the guardianship of Pope Innocent III, a cunning and ambitious pontiff who saw an opportunity to control Sicily and prevent the Hohenstaufen consolidation of power. This unexpected turn of events, leaving the future emperor under the direct influence of his family's greatest enemy, is a horrifying twist of fate, the suddenness of Henry VI's death. Just as he seemed to have achieved unprecedented power, is a powerful historical lesson. It highlights the fragility of dynastic ambitions in a time of high mortality rates and constant political intrigue. His ruthless methods and singular focus on expanding imperial power, while achieving immense territorial gains, also created a vast array of enemies and left little room for long-term stability without his guiding hand. The ambition that propelled the Hohenstaufens to such heights now leaves their heir, a mere child, vulnerable and alone in a world suddenly hostile. This premature death, a specific and often overlooked detail, directly contributed to the subsequent struggles and tragic destiny of Frederick II and the entire dynasty. Historians still debate the full implications of Henry's early demise. Would the Hohenstaufens have achieved true imperial supremacy if he had lived longer? It's a compelling what-if in medieval history. You are left with a sense of unease. Henry VI built an astonishing empire, but his brutal methods and sudden death leave a ticking time bomb for his successors. The seeds of the Hohenstaufens' ultimate tragedy, their relentless conflict with the papacy, and the inherent instability of their vast dominion, were firmly planted during his short, but impactful, reign. the stage is set for an even more complex and ultimately more devastating act in their unfolding drama. You are now in the presence of one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures of the Middle Ages, Frederick II, grandson of Frederick Barbarossa, and son of Henry II and Constance of Sicily. Born in 1194, he was orphaned at a young age, essentially becoming a ward of the formidable Pope Innocent III. This unique upbringing, caught between the imperial and papal spheres, shaped a ruler unlike any other. A man sometimes called Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, whose brilliant but ultimately doomed reign would bring the Hohenstaufen family to its tragic climax. Imagine a young boy growing up in Palermo, Sicily, a vibrant melting pot of cultures: Norman, Arab, Greek, Jewish, and Latin. You see him learning multiple languages, absorbing knowledge from scholars of all backgrounds, developing an insatiable curiosity about the world. Unlike his more austere German predecessors, Frederick was deeply steeped in the intellectual and cultural richness of the Mediterranean. He preferred his bustling, sun-drenched Sicilian court to the cold, distant castles of Germany. This love for Sicily, and his often absentee rule in Germany, would be a constant source of tension and a key detail in his downfall. His path to the imperial throne was anything but straightforward. You remember the civil war in Germany after his father's death, with various claimants vying for the crown? Frederick, initially just King of Sicily, was eventually championed by Pope Innocent III, who saw him as a weaker candidate than Otto IV of Brunswick, and thus easier to control. You witness the shrewd political maneuvering that brings Frederick, still a young man, to Germany. He is crowned King of Germany in 1212 and later, Holy Roman Emperor in 1220. This seemingly unlikely alliance with the papacy, his family's ancient foe, is a critical and ultimately ironic turn of events. As emperor, Frederick II embodies the true spirit of the Renaissance long before the Renaissance officially began. You observe his intellectual prowess and his remarkable breadth of interests. He was a keen patron of arts and sciences, funding scholars, poets, and architects regardless of their background. He authored a groundbreaking treatise on falconry, De Arte Venandi cum Avibus, The Art of Hunting with Birds, a scientific work based on empirical observation rather than ancient texts. You might see him meticulously observing a bird of prey, sketching its anatomy. A man of science in an age of superstition, he established the University of Naples, one of Europe's first state-funded universities, promoting learning and intellectual inquiry. This dedication to knowledge, a unique detail for a medieval ruler, truly earned him the moniker Wonder of the World. However, Frederick's brilliance was matched by his immense ambition, and this immediately brought him into direct, unrelenting conflict with the papacy. You remember the fundamental clash between imperial and papal authority, a conflict that defined the Hohenstaufen dynasty, with Frederick now holding both the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Sicily. The Pope, particularly Pope Gregory IX, felt increasingly encircled and threatened. He saw Frederick's power as a direct challenge to the Church's supremacy. This intense, generations-long struggle, sometimes called the Guelph-Ghibelline conflict, named after the pro-papal and pro-imperial factions in Italy, is a common historical truth. But under Frederick II, it reaches an unprecedented level of bitterness and ferocity. The most infamous point of contention was Frederick's repeated delays in undertaking a crusade. You recall that he had vowed to go on crusade multiple times, but constantly postponed it, prioritizing the consolidation of his Italian domains. Pope Gregory IX, furious at these delays, finally excommunicated Frederick in 1227. Imagine the chilling effect of this being cast out from the church, theoretically losing your spiritual salvation and stripping you of your legitimacy in the eyes of many. Yet Frederick, being the unconventional ruler he was, defied expectations. You witness him embarking on the Sixth Crusade in 1228 despite being excommunicated. This was a crusade unlike any other. Instead of fighting, Frederick used his diplomatic skills, his knowledge of Arabic, and his understanding of Muslim culture to negotiate a treaty with the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Kamil. He secured control of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth for the Christians. Without spilling a single drop of blood, this diplomatic triumph, a truly unique detail for a crusade, infuriated the Pope even more, who saw it as an unacceptable compromise with infidels. You might even hear the Pope condemning Frederick for daring to reclaim the Holy City without the Church's blessing. This remarkable peaceful acquisition of Jerusalem, a testament to Frederick's unconventional genius, only deepened the papacy's hatred for him. The struggle between Frederick and the papacy escalated into a full-blown war of propaganda and total war. You see popes launching crusades against Frederick, preaching that he was the Antichrist. Frederick, in turn, attacked papal lands, levied taxes on the clergy, and portrayed the popes as worldly, power-hungry tyrants. It was a vicious cycle of excommunications, interdicts where religious services were forbidden in imperial territories, and military clashes. The stakes were incredibly high, the very definition of political and spiritual power in Europe. This relentless conflict was a horrifying secret that drained the Hohenstaufen family's resources and ultimately led to their ruin. Frederick's governance in Sicily was particularly effective and modern for its time. You observe him creating a highly centralized, bureaucratic state, a model of efficient administration. He established the Constitutions of Melfi in 1231, a comprehensive legal code that asserted imperial authority over feudal lords, abolished private warfare, and established a system of royal courts. This was a remarkable legal achievement, laying the groundwork for modern statehood. You might see his officials diligently collecting taxes, administering justice, and managing royal monopolies, demonstrating a level of sophistication rarely seen in other parts of Europe. However, his long absences from Germany to focus on Italy and his southern kingdom led to a weakening of imperial authority in the north. You recall his father's efforts to consolidate power in Germany. Frederick, while powerful in Italy, often conceded more autonomy to the German princes to secure their loyalty. A pragmatic but ultimately detrimental trade-off for the long-term unity of the empire. This constant tension between his focus on Italy and the realities of governing Germany is a key aspect of his reign, and historians still debate whether his focus on Italy was a strategic genius or a fatal flaw. Frederick's life was also marked by personal tragedies and betrayals. You witness the rebellions of his own sons. His eldest son, Henry VII, whom he had made king of the Romans, rebelled against him in Germany, frustrated by his father's long absences and his focus on Italy. Frederick ruthlessly suppressed this rebellion, imprisoning Henry, who later died in captivity. You feel the profound sadness of a father forced to crush his own son. This familial discord, a common but no less painful part of dynastic rule, foreshadowed greater personal sorrows, despite his immense power and intellectual brilliance. Frederick II faced mounting pressure. The papacy, under Pope Innocent IV, intensified its campaign against him, formally deposing him at the Council of Lyon in 1245. This was an unprecedented act, a direct challenge to the very legitimacy of the emperor. You see the papacy actively seeking out and funding rival kings in Germany, plunging the empire back into chaos and civil war. Frederick spent the last years of his life constantly battling these papal-backed challengers, a wearying, relentless struggle. Frederick II dies in 1250, likely from dysentery, in his beloved Sicily. His death marks the beginning of the interregnum in Germany, a period of decades without a strong emperor. and the accelerating downfall of his family. He leaves behind a sprawling, contested empire and several children, each destined to face their own tragic fates. His ambition, his genius, and his relentless struggle with the papacy had defined an era, but had also exhausted his dynasty, leaving them vulnerable to the forces that would soon extinguish the Hohenstaufen name forever. The wonder of the world could not, in the end, save his family from the terrible tragedy that hung over them. You are now in the immediate aftermath of Frederick II's death in 1250, and the vast, ambitious empire he painstakingly built immediately begins to unravel. This period marks a pivotal turn towards the ultimate tragedy of the Hohenstaufen family, as the relentless papal imperial struggle, which had consumed Frederick's life, now turns its full, unyielding fury upon his successors. You witness the desperate, often futile, efforts of his children to cling to their inheritance in a world suddenly devoid of their brilliant, but controversial patriarch. Frederick II left behind several sons, both legitimate and illegitimate, each destined to play a part in the dynasty's final, agonizing acts. The most important, in terms of legal succession, is Conrad IV, his only surviving legitimate son, born to his second wife, Isabella II of Jerusalem. You see Conrad as a young man of considerable promise, intelligent and determined, but burdened by the immense legacy of his father and the relentless animosity of the papacy. He is the legitimate heir to both the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Sicily. Yet his claim is immediately contested. Imagine the chaos that erupts in Germany, with Frederick II gone. The anti-Hohenstaufen faction, heavily backed by the papacy, rallies around a series of rival kings, plunging the German realm into a period known as the Interregnum, 1250–1273. This is a time of profound political instability, where no single ruler holds undisputed imperial authority. You witness powerful German princes vying for control, constantly shifting alliances, and engaging in open warfare. This internal strife in Germany severely weakens the Hohenstaufens' northern power base, a crucial detail that hobbles Conrad's efforts from the start. Conrad IV's primary focus, however, is on Italy and Sicily. You follow him as he makes his way south, striving to secure his control over his father's beloved kingdom. Sicily, with its rich treasury and strategic location, is the true heart of the Hohenstaufen power in Italy, and Conrad knows he must defend it at all costs. But even in Sicily, he faces fierce resistance. The papacy, under Pope Innocent IV, is unrelenting in its opposition. Innocent IV views any Hohenstaufen ruler as a mortal threat to the Church's independence, and launches a full-scale spiritual and political war against Conrad. You witness the papacy's relentless propaganda campaign. Pope Innocent IV excommunicates Conrad, just as his father had been. He preaches crusades against Conrad, portraying him as a tyrant and an enemy of God. This widespread denouncement, a commonly known historical truth about the papacy's tactics, attempts to strip Conrad of all legitimacy in the eyes of the Christian world. You might hear impassioned sermons from papal legates, condemning Conrad and calling for his overthrow, swaying public opinion against him. This relentless spiritual assault is a subtle, yet deeply horrifying secret of the Hohenstaufens' decline. The Church's immense power to delegitimize a ruler. Innocent IV also actively seeks out and funds rivals to the Hohenstaufen claim. In Sicily, you see him offering the crown of Sicily to various European princes, desperately trying to find someone willing and able to dislodge Conrad. This constant political pressure, combined with outright military support for Conrad's enemies, drains Conrad's resources and forces him into continuous warfare. He is constantly defending his inheritance against papal-backed invasions and internal revolts. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Conrad IV displays considerable military and administrative skill. You observe him fighting bravely in Italy, winning several victories against papal forces and their allies. He attempts to re-establish order in Sicily, consolidating his power in his family's southern stronghold. He is determined to uphold his father's legacy and defend the family's right to rule. You might see him, a young king, leading his troops into battle, his face grim with resolve, a stark reminder of the personal burden of this endless conflict. However, the odds are stacked against him. The vast resources of the papacy, its ability to galvanize support across Europe, and the constant threat of rival claimants prove to be too much. Conrad is always on the defensive, always fighting a war of attrition on multiple fronts. His financial resources are stretched thin, and his support base in Germany is fragmented and unreliable due to the ongoing interregnum. This desperate struggle to maintain his inheritance is a key detail that highlights the overwhelming forces arrayed against the Hohenstaufen. Just when it seems Conrad might consolidate his position, tragedy strikes again, mirroring his father's fate. You hear the devastating news Conrad IV dies in 1254, likely from malaria, at the young age of 26 in Livello, Italy. His death is yet another awful tragedy for the Hohenstaufen family, occurring just as he was beginning to gain some ground against his enemies. It's a bitter irony that two successive Hohenstaufen emperors, both able and ambitious, succumbed to disease at such young ages, cutting short their potential reigns and plunging the dynasty into deeper crisis. Conrad's premature death leaves his only son, Conradin, a mere 2-year-old child, as the last legitimate male heir of the Hohenstaufen line. This is the ultimate horrifying secret. The dynasty's fate now rests on the shoulders of an innocent toddler, far removed from the centers of power, and utterly defenseless against his family's relentless enemies. Conrad IV, in his will, places Conradin under the guardianship of his half-brother, Manfred, a charismatic and ambitious illegitimate son of Frederick II. This decision, born of necessity, sets the stage for a dramatic and ultimately tragic power struggle for the heart of Sicily. With Conrad IV gone, the papacy, still under Innocent IV, intensifies its efforts to seize Sicily. You see the Pope immediately claiming overlordship of the kingdom, viewing it as now vacant and ripe for papal control. This aggressive move shows the papacy's unwavering determination to eradicate Hohenstaufen power in Italy and eliminate the perceived threat they pose to the Church. This relentless pursuit of the family, even after the deaths of its powerful emperors, is a sobering truth. Conrad IV's reign, though brief, highlights the relentless and existential nature of the papal imperial struggle. He was a capable ruler, but he simply did not have enough time or sufficient resources to overcome the combined might of the papacy and its allies. His death, coming so soon after his father's, creates a vacuum that the papacy is eager to fill, setting the stage for the final bloody acts in the Hohenstaufen saga. The struggle for their inherited lands now falls to a child and his ambitious uncle, destined to face forces far greater than their own. Historians still debate whether Conrad IV could have truly succeeded in stabilizing the empire had he lived longer. It's a compelling what-if that speaks to the immense pressures on him. You are now observing a new, precarious chapter in the Hohenstaufen tragedy, one dominated by a figure of immense charisma and ambition, yet ultimately doomed Manfred, the illegitimate but formidable son of Frederick II, with the legitimate heir, Conradin, a mere child. Manfred steps into the power vacuum left by his half-brother Conrad IV's untimely death, fighting desperately to preserve his family's legacy against the relentless onslaught of the papacy. Imagine Manfred, in his late 20s, a man possessing much of his father's brilliance, charm, and military acumen, but also burdened by the stigma of his illegitimate birth. He is a cultivated prince, a patron of the arts, but also a ruthless warrior and a shrewd politician. You witness him navigating the treacherous landscape of Italian politics with a skill that might have rivaled Frederick II himself. He is a master of cunning, forging alliances, securing fortresses, and steadily building a power base in the Kingdom of Sicily. Manfred's immediate challenge is the papacy, specifically Pope Innocent IV, who saw Conrad IV's death as the definitive end of Hohenstaufen rule in Sicily. You remember Innocent IV's unwavering goal to sever the connection between the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Sicily. Fearing the encirclement of Rome, with Conrad IV gone, Innocent IV boldly asserts direct papal suzerainty over Sicily, even leading a papal army into the kingdom in 1254. You see the sheer audacity of this move. The Pope himself acting as a temporal lord, trying to physically seize the Hohenstaufen inheritance. Manfred, however, is not one to surrender easily. You witness his audacious and skillful resistance. He rallies the Hohenstaufen loyalists, many of whom despise papal interference and prefer the strong. Centralized rule of the Staufens, he uses his charisma to win over mercenaries and local lords. He is, in essence, fighting a guerrilla war against the papal forces, constantly harassing them, exploiting their weaknesses, and slowly pushing them back. You might hear stories of his daring raids and his ability to inspire intense loyalty among his followers. Despite his complex background, his most decisive victory comes at the Battle of Foggia in 1254, where he decisively defeats the papal army. This victory forces Pope Innocent IV to retreat, and he dies shortly thereafter, likely disheartened by the setback. You sense a brief moment of reprieve for Manfred, a glimmer of hope that he might secure his family's position. This unexpected triumph against the papacy is a testament to Manfred's military prowess and determination. With Innocent IV gone, a new pope, Alexander IV takes up the mantle of relentless opposition. The papacy's policy remains unchanged: no Hohenstaufen on the throne of Sicily. Alexander IV continues to preach crusades against Manfred and actively seeks a new, loyal candidate for the Sicilian crown. You remember this persistent papal strategy from Frederick II's time, and it highlights a common historical truth: the papacy was unwavering in its long-term goals, regardless of who sat on the imperial or Sicilian throne. In 1258, facing continued papal hostility, and with rumors that his nephew Conradin had died, Manfred takes a bold, and ultimately fateful, step. He has himself crowned King of Sicily and Palermo. This is a crucial moment. While he initially acted as regent for the young Conradin, his coronation as king effectively usurps Conradin's legitimate claim. You witness the solemn ceremony, feeling the immense weight of the crown he places on his own head. This act solidifies his power, but also makes him an even greater target for the papacy, who now view him as a direct usurper and an even more dangerous adversary. This usurpation, a complicated and ultimately tragic detail, divides the Hohenstaufen loyalists and gives the papacy further moral ammunition. Manfred's reign as King of Sicily is a period of cultural flourishing, reminiscent of his father's court. You observe him continuing Frederick II's tradition of scholarship and patronage of the arts. His court in Palermo becomes a vibrant center of intellectual life, drawing poets, scientists, and artists from across Europe and the Muslim world. He surrounds himself with a diverse array of advisors, mirroring his father's eclectic tastes. This cultural vibrancy, a unique detail for a king in constant warfare, highlights Manfred's intellectual legacy. However, despite his brilliance, Manfred's position is inherently precarious. He constantly faces the threat of invasion, fueled by papal funding and propaganda. The papacy, desperate to dislodge him, eventually finds its champion in Charles of Anjou, the ambitious and ruthless younger brother of King Louis IX of France. You see Charles of Anjou, a formidable warrior and a pious Catholic, accepting the Pope's offer of the Sicilian crown. This alliance between the papacy and the powerful French Angevin dynasty marks a deadly turning point for Manfred and the Hohenstaufens. In 1266, the stage is set for the final, decisive confrontation. You witness the Battle of Benevento, a brutal and pivotal engagement. Charles of Anjou, with a well-equipped French army, marches south into Sicily. Manfred, despite his military skill, is outnumbered and betrayed by some of his own vassals who abandon him on the battlefield. You see the desperate struggle, the clash of steel, the desperate cries. Manfred, refusing to flee, fights bravely, even recklessly, until he is cut down in the thick of the fighting. His body is found among the slain, a tragic end for a proud and ambitious king. The aftermath of Benevento is a devastating blow. Manfred's body is initially given a proper burial by Charles of Anjou, but at the insistence of the papal legate. It is later exhumed and cast into unconsecrated ground. Stripped of its royal honors, this posthumous desecration, a truly horrifying secret, symbolizes the papacy's complete and utter triumph over this branch of the Hohenstaufen family. His wife and children are captured and imprisoned, with many dying in captivity, effectively extinguishing his direct line. Manfred's death leaves the kingdom of Sicily firmly in the hands of Charles of Anjou. The papacy rejoices, believing they have finally crushed the viper's brood, as they often refer to the Hohenstaufens. However, the tragedy is not yet complete. You remember the young Conradin, the legitimate heir who is still alive and growing up in Germany. Manfred's death leaves a powerful vacuum in the hearts of Hohenstaufen loyalists in Germany and Italy, who now turn their hopes to the last true scion of the imperial line. Manfred's reign, though ultimately unsuccessful in securing the Hohenstaufen dynasty, showcases his remarkable abilities and his unwavering loyalty to his family's cause. He was a tragic figure, fighting against overwhelming odds and a relentless, powerful enemy. His demise sets the stage for the final, most heart-wrenching act of the Hohenstaufen tragedy, where the last legitimate hope of the dynasty makes a desperate, ill-fated gamble to reclaim what was lost. Historians still debate whether Manfred's usurpation of the crown from Conradin was a necessary evil or a fatal miscalculation that ultimately weakened the Hohenstaufen cause. It's a compelling question that speaks to the profound complexities of his story. You now turn your gaze to the last, agonizing act of the Hohenstaufen tragedy, focused entirely on the young shoulders of Conradin, the last legitimate male heir of the once mighty imperial dynasty. He is a child, a symbol of fading glory, whose brief and ultimately ill-fated quest to reclaim his birthright will bring the Hohenstaufen name to a brutal and definitive end. Imagine Conradin as a bright, intelligent boy, growing up far from the political machinations of Italy, in the quiet ducal lands of Swabia in Germany. You see him being educated by loyal tutors, constantly reminded of his illustrious lineage, the grandson of the magnificent Frederick II, the great-grandson of the legendary Barbarossa. He is the legitimate king of Jerusalem and Sicily, and, theoretically, the rightful heir to the Holy Roman Empire. Yet, all these grand titles exist only on paper. His reality is that his family's vast inheritance has been seized. His uncle Manfred is dead, and the papacy, along with Charles of Anjou, holds absolute sway over his rightful lands this childhood. Steeped in tales of past greatness but overshadowed by present powerlessness, is a profoundly sad detail. The news of Manfred's defeat and death at Benevento in 1266 sends shockwaves through the remaining Hohenstaufen loyalists, particularly in Germany and the cities of Italy that still resented papal and Angevin rule. You recall how Manfred, though an illegitimate son, had been a charismatic and capable leader, holding the fort in Sicily. His demise leaves a gaping void, but also a rallying cry. All hopes now turn to Conradin. He is the last, pure symbol of the legitimate imperial line, untainted by his uncle's usurpation, and therefore, for many, the true hope for restoring the Staufen glory. You observe the relentless pressure exerted on Conradin by his supporters. They They see him as their last chance to throw off the oppressive rule of Charles of Anjou in Sicily and the overbearing influence of the papacy. Despite his young age, he is barely 16, he is urged to embark on an ambitious and incredibly risky expedition to reclaim his inheritance, his mother, Elizabeth of Bavaria, and his loyal German noblemen. Likely filled with a mixture of hope and desperation, encourage him to raise an army. This decision to allow a mere boy to lead such a perilous venture is a grim testament to the dire circumstances facing the Hohenstaufen loyalists. In 1267, you witness Conradin's audacious march into Italy. He is accompanied by a small but devoted retinue of German knights and nobles, including his close friend and cousin, Frederick the Margrave of Baden. As he travels south, his journey becomes a triumphant procession for many. Italian cities that loathe Charles of Anjou and the papacy welcome him with open arms, hailing him as their liberator. You see enthusiastic crowds lining the streets, shouting his name, showering him with flowers. Support swells as mercenaries and Ghibelline pro-imperial factions flock to his banner. He even receives financial aid from cities like Pisa and Siena. This wave of popular support is a surprising and significant detail, showing the deep reservoir of anti-papal and anti-Angevin sentiment in Italy. However, the forces arrayed against him are formidable. You remember Charles of Anjou, the ruthless and efficient brother of King Louis IX of France, who now firmly controls the Kingdom of Sicily. Charles is a seasoned warrior, with a disciplined and well-funded army. And, most importantly, he has the unwavering backing of the papacy, now led by Pope Clement IV, who is as determined as his predecessors to eradicate the Hohenstaufen line once and for all. You might hear the Pope condemning Conradin as a viper's brood, just as previous popes condemned his father and grandfather, reiterating the common historical truth that the papacy viewed the Hohenstaufens as an existential threat. The climax of this tragic quest comes at the Battle of Tagliacozzo on August 23, 1268. You observe the two armies arrayed for battle Conradin's eager but less experienced forces, bolstered by Italian Ghibellines, against Charles of Anjou's seasoned French and Provençal knights. The battle is initially promising for Conradin, with his forces gaining an early advantage. You see the young prince fighting bravely, inspiring his men. However, Charles of Anjou, a master tactician, employs a crucial stratagem. He holds a hidden reserve force. At a critical moment, when Conradin's troops are exhausted and think they have won, Charles unleashes his fresh troops. This tactical brilliance, a less commonly known detail, turns the tide decisively. You witness the horrifying rout. Conradin's army is utterly defeated, scattered, and cut down. He and his close companions, including Frederick of Baden, manage to escape the battlefield, desperately trying to make their way to safety. For a brief moment, there is hope. They attempt to flee by sea from the Roman port of Astura, hoping to reach Sicily or even North Africa. But fate, or rather betrayal, intervenes. You see their small group captured by Giovanni Frangipane, a local lord who recognizes them and, swayed by the promise of reward from Charles of Anjou, hands them over. This act of betrayal, a truly awful detail, seals Conradin's fate. He is brought before Charles of Anjou, a prisoner in the kingdom that was rightfully his. The subsequent trial and execution of Conradin are a barbaric act, a horrifying secret in the annals of medieval justice. You witness the sham trial in Naples. Despite pleas from influential figures and the strong custom against executing royal prisoners, Charles of Anjou, with the explicit backing of Pope Clement IV, orders Conradin's death. This decision is driven by a desire to utterly extinguish the Hohenstaufen threat and prevent any future claims to Sicily. You hear the arguments from Charles's advisors that executing a king by birthright, even a defeated one, is a dangerous precedent. But Charles is unyielding. On October 29, 1268, you stand in the market square of Naples, Witnessing the unspeakable Conradin, at just 16 years old, is led to the scaffold. He is accompanied by his faithful companion, Frederick of Baden. You see the young prince, facing his executioners with courage and dignity. He reportedly proclaims his innocence, asserting his rightful claim to the throne, and then throws his glove into the crowd, a symbolic challenge to anyone who would avenge him. Then, with a swift stroke of the executioner's axe, the last legitimate male heir of the Hohenstaufen dynasty falls. His young friend, Frederick of Baden, is executed immediately after him. The execution of Conradin is an act of shocking brutality for the time. It is a profound violation of customary medieval practice concerning captured royalty, and a stark demonstration of Charles of Anjou's ruthless determination. This isn't just a political murder, it's a symbolic annihilation of a dynasty. You feel the cold finality of that moment. The ultimate tragedy. Conradin's death marks the absolute extinction of the direct male line of the Hohenstaufen family. The imperial dream. The struggle with the papacy. The vast empire built by Barbarossa and Frederick II. All of it comes to a brutal, abrupt end on that scaffold in Naples. The papacy, having relentlessly pursued the Hohenstaufens for generations, had finally achieved its grim objective. The long, drawn-out tragedy of the Hohenstaufen family concludes not with a whimper, but with a horrifying, definitive blow: the immediate power vacuum in Germany, the ultimate triumph of the papacy, and the firm establishment of Angevin rule in Sicily are the direct consequences of this final, awful act. You have witnessed the brutal finality of Conradin's execution, a chilling end to the direct male line of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. But even with the last scion fallen, the story of their downfall isn't merely about the demise of a family, it's about the profound and lasting impact their epic struggle had on the very fabric of medieval Europe. This chapter explores the immediate aftermath, the power vacuum, and the enduring shadows cast by the Staufen extinction. Imagine the collective gasp across Europe as news of Conradin's execution spread, while the papacy and Charles of Anjou celebrated their victory. Many, even those not directly allied with the Hohenstaufens, were horrified by the unprecedented execution of a legitimate, albeit deposed, monarch. This act set a dangerous precedent, signaling a new, more ruthless era in medieval power politics. You might hear hushed conversations in castles and monasteries, debating the morality of Charles's actions and the papacy's complicity. This widely perceived injustice is a common historical detail that underscores the brutality of the era. The most immediate consequence of the Hohenstaufen extinction was the prolonged interregnum in Germany. You recall that even after Frederick II's death, Germany was plunged into a period without a strong, undisputed emperor. Conradin's demise solidified this chaos, with no clear imperial heir from the powerful Hohenstaufen line. The German princes were left to squabble amongst themselves, vying for influence and territory. You witnessed the constant local wars, the breakdown of central authority, and the rise of powerful regional lords who effectively became sovereigns in their own right. This era, lasting until 1273 with the election of Rudolf of Habsburg, severely weakened the Holy Roman Empire, transforming it from a powerful, centralized entity into a loose confederation of semi-independent states, a critical long-term consequence of the Hohenstaufen fall. In Italy, the situation was equally transformative. You remember Charles of Anjou's decisive victory and his firm control over the Kingdom of Sicily, which included southern Italy. His rule, however, was harsh and oppressive. He imposed heavy taxes, favored French officials, and alienated the local populace who had grown accustomed to the more lenient and culturally diverse rule of the Hohenstaufens. You see the resentment simmering beneath the surface, particularly among the Sicilian population. This oppression, a horrifying secret for the common people, would inevitably lead to further unrest. Indeed. Charles of Anjou's harsh rule directly led to the infamous Sicilian Vespers of 1282. You witnessed this bloody uprising, sparked by a seemingly minor incident outside a church in Palermo, rapidly escalate into a full-scale massacre of the French. The sheer ferocity of the Sicilian rebellion, driven by years of accumulated resentment, is terrifying. You see the streets running red with blood as Sicilians rise up to reclaim their autonomy. This event, a commonly known historical truth, directly resulted in the separation of Sicily from the mainland kingdom of Naples, which Charles retained, with Sicily eventually coming under the rule of the Aragonese. The irony is palpable. The papacy's champion, Charles of Anjou, ultimately couldn't hold the entirety of the prize he had so ruthlessly seized, demonstrating that even a total victory can sow seeds of future conflict. The papacy, having finally achieved its goal of eradicating the Hohenstaufen threat, now faced a new dilemma: the immense power of its own champion, Charles of Anjou, and the growing influence of the French crown in Italian affairs. You see the papacy, having used one powerful family to destroy another, now grappling with the consequences of empowering a new, potentially equally challenging, temporal lord. This highlights a subtle yet profound, enduring secret of medieval power dynamics: the Church's constant struggle to maintain its spiritual authority without becoming subservient to any single temporal ruler. Historians still debate whether the papacy's relentless pursuit of the Hohenstaufens ultimately benefited the Church in the long run, or if it merely traded one powerful enemy for another, the Hohenstaufen legacy, however, was not entirely erased. You recall the intellectual and cultural flourishing under Frederick II in Sicily. His court had been a beacon of learning, a bridge between Eastern and Western thought. While the political dynasty was extinguished, their cultural contributions, particularly in Sicily, continued to resonate. You might see lingering influences in art, architecture, and even legal traditions in the former Hohenstaufen territories. This enduring cultural impact, a less commonly known detail amidst the political chaos, stands in stark contrast to their brutal political end. The fall of the Hohenstaufens also fundamentally altered the nature of the Holy Roman Empire. You remember Barbarossa's dream of a strong, unified empire mirroring ancient Rome. His successor's inability to maintain this vision, largely due to the relentless papal opposition and the inherent centrifugal forces within Germany, meant that the empire would never again achieve such a degree of centralization. Future emperors, particularly those from the Habsburg dynasty, would focus more on consolidating their own dynastic lands rather than attempting to exert pervasive imperial authority over Germany or Italy. You sense a shift in the very concept of empire in Europe, moving away from universal claims towards more defined national entities. The tragic story of the Hohenstaufen family, from their meteoric rise to their brutal extinction, became a cautionary tale throughout medieval Europe. You might hear whispers of a Staufen curse, tales of their relentless pursuit by fate and the Church. Their story embodies the dangers of excessive ambition and the perilous balance between secular and spiritual power in the Middle Ages. Their fall was so dramatic, so complete, that it imprinted itself on the collective memory, becoming a potent symbol of dynastic doom. The vacuum left by the Hohenstaufens' fall also created opportunities for new powers to rise. In Germany, the Habsburgs would eventually emerge as the dominant force, albeit with a very different approach to imperial power. In Italy, city-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan would gain greater independence, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. So, while the Hohenstaufens met an awful end, their demise reshaped the map of Europe and the very trajectory of its political and cultural development. The bitter irony is that their relentless struggle against the papacy, intended to secure their own power, ultimately paved the way for new political landscapes that neither side could have fully predicted. You are now looking back from the vantage point of the years immediately following the Hohenstaufen extinction, seeing how the power vacuum left by their demise created a tumultuous and transformative period across Europe. Particularly in Germany and Italy, the absence of a strong central imperial authority, a direct consequence of the Staufen downfall, unleashed forces that would reshape the political landscape for centuries to come. In Germany, the death of Conradin in 1268 officially marked the definitive end of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. You remember the period of the interregnum 1250-1273, which had begun with Frederick II's death and was exacerbated by the lack of a clear, accepted successor. With Conradin gone, any lingering hope for a strong, centralized monarchy in Germany faded. You witnessed the German princes seizing this opportunity to consolidate their own power, becoming increasingly independent from any nominal imperial overlord. They build their own castles, establish their own laws, and effectively rule their territories as sovereign states. This decentralization of power is a crucial long-term impact of the Hohenstaufen downfall. A common historical truth in periods of weak central authority: imagine the proliferation of local wars, the constant feuds between nobles, and the breakdown of any semblance of widespread imperial justice. Travel becomes more dangerous. Trade routes are disrupted, and the common people suffer under the whims of countless petty lords. You might see a local merchant lamenting the lack of a strong emperor to protect him from robber barons, a stark contrast to the more orderly, if strict, imperial rule under the early Hohenstaufens. This period of political fragmentation, often described as a time without an emperor, profoundly shaped the future of Germany, preventing the emergence of a unified nation-state for centuries. Unlike France or England, the election of Rudolf of Habsburg as King of Germany in 1273 finally brings an end to the interregnum. You see Rudolf, a relatively minor count, chosen precisely because he was perceived as weak and unlikely to challenge the prince's newfound autonomy. However, Rudolf proves to be a shrewd and capable ruler, not in asserting imperial power over all of Germany, but in consolidating his own dynastic lands. This marks a fundamental shift in imperial policy. Future Holy Roman emperors, largely drawn from the Habsburg family, would focus primarily on building their own hereditary domains, transforming the empire into more of a loose confederation than a true monarchy. You might observe a subtle but significant shift in the imperial crown itself, moving from being a symbol of universal dominion to one more closely associated with a specific dynastic family. In Italy, the immediate aftermath was equally turbulent. You recall Charles of Anjou's firm but brutal rule over the Kingdom of Sicily after his victory against Manfred and Conradin? His heavy taxation and preference for French administrators quickly alienated the Sicilian population. This deep resentment, a horrifying secret simmering under the surface of Angevin rule, exploded in the Sicilian Vespers of 1282. You revisit the brutal uprising, sparked by a seemingly minor incident, as the Sicilians rise up en masse, massacring thousands of French. This event is a powerful testament to the dangers of oppressive foreign rule. The Sicilian Vespers led to the War of the Sicilian Vespers, a protracted conflict that lasted for decades. You see the Aragonese, led by Peter III, seizing the opportunity to claim the Sicilian throne, leading to a long and complex struggle for control over the island. This conflict effectively splits the Old Kingdom of Sicily into two entities: the island of Sicily under Aragonese rule, and the mainland Kingdom of Naples, or Kingdom of Sicily on the mainland, remaining under Angevin control. This fragmentation of a once unified Hohenstaufen kingdom is a direct consequence of their fall and the papacy's efforts to dislodge them. The papacy, having finally succeeded in destroying the Hohenstaufen threat, now found itself facing new challenges. You observe the papacy's efforts to exert its dominance over Italy, but it increasingly came into conflict with the rising power of city-states like Florence, Venice, and Genoa. these communes, freed from the strong hand of the emperor, grew wealthy through trade and developed their own independent political structures. You see them navigating the complex political landscape, sometimes siding with the papacy, sometimes against it, always prioritizing their own economic and political interests. This increased autonomy of Italian city-states is a significant, if less commonly known, long-term impact of the Hohenstaufen fall. Furthermore, the papacy itself faced internal struggles and external pressures. You might notice the growing influence of the French monarchy over the papacy, culminating in the Avignon papacy in the early 14th century, where the Pope resided in Avignon, France, effectively under French control. This period, often called the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, is a stark reminder that the Church, having triumphed over the Hohenstaufens, was not immune to the machinations of other powerful European monarchies. This unexpected turn of events, where the papacy's own power was curbed by secular rulers, is a compelling detail. The legacy of the Hohenstaufen family also endured in popular memory and folklore. You remember the legend of Frederick Barbarossa sleeping in a cave, waiting to awaken and restore the glory of the empire. This myth, deeply ingrained in German identity, reflects a longing for a powerful, unified imperial past and the enduring romanticism associated with the Hohenstaufen era. You might hear peasants whispering tales of Barbarossa's return, a comforting thought in a fragmented and chaotic Germany. This powerful cultural legacy, a beautiful counterpoint to the family's awful tragedy, shows how historical figures can transcend their physical demise. The legal and administrative innovations of Frederick II in Sicily also had a lasting impact. You recall his comprehensive legal code, the Constitutions of Melfi, which laid the groundwork for a more centralized and bureaucratic state, while the Hohenstaufen political structure in Sicily crumbled. Some of its administrative principles and legal frameworks continued to influence later rulers in the region. This is a subtle, almost hidden, legacy that demonstrates how, even in defeat, certain intellectual and governmental advancements can persist. Historians still debate the extent to which Frederick II's administrative ideas truly influenced later European state-building, or if they were largely unique to his Sicilian kingdom. The ultimate tragedy of the Hohenstaufen family, therefore, extends beyond their personal suffering and extinction. It lies in the profound and often destabilizing effects their fall had on the political geography of Europe. Their relentless struggle with the papacy, while ending in their annihilation, also fundamentally reshaped the Holy Roman Empire, empowered new regional actors, and set in motion a long period of fragmentation in Germany. The awful truth is that their story is not just about a family's downfall, but about the violent birth of a new political order. Born from the ashes of imperial ambition, you are now in the very final moments of our journey through the Hohenstaufen tragedy, contemplating the lasting echoes of their dramatic rise and brutal fall, centuries after their demise. Their story isn't confined to dusty medieval chronicles. It continues to resonate in the political, cultural, and even psychological landscape of Europe. Particularly in Germany and Italy, the awful truth of their fate became a powerful historical lesson, shaping national identities and political thought long after the last Hohenstaufen breath was drawn. Imagine the German lands in the centuries after the interregnum. You recall how the Hohenstaufens' demise led to the prolonged weakening of central imperial authority, allowing the myriad of German princes to consolidate their power. This historical fragmentation, directly attributable to the Staufen downfall, profoundly influenced Germany's development. Unlike unified nation-states like France, England, or Spain that emerged in the early modern period, Germany remained a patchwork of independent states until the late 19th century. You can almost see the political map of Central Europe, a jigsaw puzzle of duchies, electorates, and free cities, each fiercely guarding its autonomy. This is a common historical truth. The the Hohenstaufen failure to create a strong, centralized German monarchy had enormous, long-term consequences for German national development. This political fragmentation also fostered a distinct German cultural identity. While there was no single German state, there was a shared language and a growing sense of shared heritage. The legend of Frederick Barbarossa sleeping in Kyffhäuser Mountain, waiting to awaken and restore the glory of the empire, became a powerful national myth. You hear the whispers of this legend persist through the centuries, reflecting a yearning for unity and a powerful leader. This romanticized view of Barbarossa, a stark contrast to the brutal political realities he navigated, shows how history can be reimagined to serve later nationalistic aspirations. This cultural ideal of a strong, unified Germany, often linked to the Hohenstaufen past, is a poignant echo of their legacy in Italy. The Hohenstaufen legacy was equally complex. You remember their attempts to unite the peninsula under imperial rule and the papacy's relentless opposition to this. The papacy's ultimate victory, while removing the immediate imperial threat, did not lead to a unified Italy under papal control. Instead, you saw the rise of independent city-states in the north, like Florence, Venice, and Milan, which became centers of trade, banking, and culture, eventually igniting the Renaissance without the constant pressure of the Hohenstaufen emperors. These communes had the breathing room to flourish and develop their unique political and economic systems. This unexpected outcome, the flourishing of independent Italian city-states, is a less commonly known detail that directly stems from the Hohenstaufens' demise. The papacy itself, having triumphed over its greatest imperial rival, entered a period of unprecedented temporal power, but also internal and external challenges. You recall the Avignon papacy, where the Pope was effectively under French influence, and later the Western Schism, with multiple popes claiming legitimacy. These events highlighted that even after removing the Hohenstaufen threat, the papacy's struggles for supreme authority were far from over. The awful irony is that the very ruthlessness used to crush the Hohenstaufens might have set a precedent for later secular challenges to papal authority. Historians still debate whether the papacy's relentless focus on destroying the Hohenstaufens, rather than addressing internal reforms, ultimately contributed to its own later vulnerabilities. The Hohenstaufen story also served as a powerful historical precedent for the dangers of unchecked ambition and the peril of the church-state conflict. Their downfall became a cautionary tale about the limits of imperial power when confronted by a determined papacy, and vice versa. You might read later philosophical treatises from the Renaissance and Reformation, implicitly or explicitly drawing on the Hohenstaufen experience to argue for the separation of powers or the limits of temporal and spiritual authority. The philosophical implications of their tragedy echoed for centuries. Even in modern times, the Hohenstaufens continue to hold a certain fascination. Their story, replete with larger-than-life figures, epic battles, and dramatic personal tragedies, still captures the imagination. You see their castles in Germany and Italy, often in ruins but still evoking a sense of past grandeur and struggle. Their names, like Barbarossa and Frederick II, remain etched in historical memory, symbols of medieval power and intellectual daring, the awful tragedy of their extinction. The image of young Conradin on the scaffold serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of dynastic power and the brutal realities of medieval politics. Ultimately, the story of the Hohenstaufen family is a microcosm of the grand sweeps of medieval history. It encapsulates the titanic struggle between universal empire and the nascent forces of national and regional autonomy, between secular and spiritual power, and between ambitious individuals and the relentless tide of historical change. Their rise was spectacular, their reign brilliant, and their fall utterly, completely awful. But it was a fall that cleared the way for new political experiments, new cultural awakenings, and a very different future for Europe. The echoes of their tragedy continue to whisper through the ages, reminding us of the enduring power of ambition, the devastating cost of conflict, and the complex, often brutal, ways in which history unfolds.